The glider starts to feel a bit edgy. Woohoo! So the light is Ozone's lightweight ENC two-liner, the light version of the Photon. I've been testing it a lot over the last several months. To be honest, it's a little bit ridiculous. I've flown the glider so much over such a long time. And I've been flying both the size ML and also the MS at a whole different load of places in their weight ranges with a bunch of different harnesses. So I've got to fly a lot. All the product information, the tech data, all those details you can check on our website. I've done a lot of ground handling, all kinds of conditions, everything from launching in nil wind, forward launch in nil wind, through to launching in very top end. First of all, I'll say that I think the Light and the Photon, I personally, from all my testing of both gliders, and I have tested them both a lot, I think they're very similar gliders. The main difference really is just that difference in weight, which translates into the difference that you'd expect with a lighter wing. And on the ground, that's noticeable, particularly in lighter winds. The Light is a bit easier on the ground than the Photon in light winds because it's just got less weight, less inertia, so it inflates a bit easier and comes up easier, I think noticeably so. Yeah, and the glider inflates really nicely, despite having quite relatively small sails and a very pronounced shark nose. Ozone have done a really good job at the R&D of making the glider inflate very nicely. I've really played around a lot with it, with the wind coming from the side and all sorts of things, and it's very, very good on the ground. Launching in strong conditions, strong gusty conditions, I find the Light is actually pretty forgiving for the class, which is high C in the C class. I mean, even if you bring the glider straight up through the power zone, but that's always going to be more likely you're going to get yanked and plucked. But even in that, it's relatively forgiving. It's a bit more forgiving than the Photon, just because again it's got less weight, so the glider builds up less speed, gets less energy, and is easier to stop. But I'd certainly, in strong conditions, I'd always bring the glider up around the side of the wind window, which is what I do for most gliders anyway. So overall, really, I'm really impressed with the ground handling. I wouldn't call it sort of playful and stuff like that, but very, very sorted. The brake travel, one thing I will mention is that the brake travel is set very long, like the Photon. I find the brake travel very, very similar to the Photon, set very long, and when you're on the ground it's very noticeable. If there's like one of those, you know, when you launch and there's one of those thermal gusts and the glider wants to, it's like the thermal gust like pulling the glider off, which you do with any wing, then it's kind of like hard to stop the glider if you're just holding the toggles. And I found, like, when I'm ground handling, I kind of want to ground handle with a wrap. So that gives you an idea, I think, of the brake travel. And the Photon I find very, very similar, the same. Then on takeoff, because the glider is very pitch stable and it doesn't tend to roll and move around, the glider wants to sit above your head and it's very stable. It's also very good for the launch. When you go off, the glider isn't tending to like roll around or pitch about and require a lot of piloting. Obviously, if there's really turbulent air, then it's going to. Relatively easy gliders to manage for the class. Once you're in the air, the feeling you have straight away, and you've already got it from launch, is the glider. They're very solid, it's reassuring. The glider is super clean and very pitch stable, sits above your head in a very kind of predictable, solid way. And so you get that feeling as you fly out onto the air as well. They feel very solid and collapse resistant. I think at first it's kind of a little bit, the feedback feels a bit muted. It took me a little bit to dial into the feedback, both the Photon and the Light, but they do give you feedback. They've got a certain amount of give and movement in the wing. It's like a suspension bridge. So if you have a suspension bridge, if the bridge is really, where they used to make them like really rigid, then when you got an earthquake or something like that, the bridge would just fall apart. So I think what it is, and is that there's a certain amount of give put in the glider in some ways, because it's so solid across the wing and so well formed, it's, if that was just kept really taut, then you'd have a really edgy glider. And so it's like they just smoothened out and softened the glider a bit. And so ironically, when you're flying in kind of just a moderate bit of, or gentle bit of turbulence, you kind of notice the wings moving about. And you think, oh, it's really smooth. How come the glider's moving about? But then when you fly and it's active turbulent conditions, what happens is that, like the suspension bridge idea, is that it starts to dampen things out and smooth things out. And there's no doubt about it, both the Photon and the Light are extremely comfortable. Maybe extreme's a bit extreme, but they're very, very comfortable gliders in turbulent conditions. When the conditions are a little bit more sort of gentle and smooth, and say the lift is a little bit more wispy and a little bit more subtle, they're definitely a bit more on the dampened side and don't give as much feedback. So when it's that light and scratchy conditions, which I personally really like, I like it when the conditions are light and scratchy and challenging. In those conditions, then I think you'll find that in terms of finding and seeking the lift, you really need to kind of tune into the glider and feel quite a bit, because they are a bit more dampened. Both the Light and the Photon, they have a very good glide. We'll get more onto that, and a very good sink rate, and are very efficient at soaring. So just when you're soaring up and down the ridge, you kind of notice that they're very efficient. They're always doing relatively well. So the next thing you notice is you turn the glider, and you definitely notice the brakes are set very long. Definitely, if you fly with your hands on the toggles, and I find my hands are right down here somewhere. So I find myself, as you'll see repeatedly in our videos, I find myself not only taking a half wrap just is not enough for me, and I've got reasonably long arms, so so I find that I really need to take a wrap, and I have to take a kind of extra big wrap and wrap it around my hand a bit to get right when I'm trying to turn tight. This is so, and then I need to really use good weight shift and to get it round. So that's definitely something I noticed both of the Photon and the Light, is that they've got a very steady, smooth, flat turn, and they don't build up a lot of inertia. They kind of steady as she goes round in the turns. And if you're gentle and ginger on it, I think you're going to end up doing a pretty wide, flat turn around like that. For me, it's quite similar to the Volt 4 in terms of it's got that kind of steady, flat turn. The Volt 5 is a little bit more like that, but it's still similar. But what I found is, the really plus side with the Photon and Light, is that basically what they want you to do is to like tell them what to do, and they allow it. And they kind of want you to manhandle them and use to be kind of like physical with them. They want you to kind of tell them who's boss. If you want to crank it and bank it, then you've got to get firm, a little bit aggressive with them. They've got a very clear and quite relatively for the class forgiving stall point. Don't get carried away. Don't go crazy, guys and girls. Don't go spinning your gliders out of the sky. But they are pretty forgiving for the class on the stall and spin point. What I worked out, once you get to know the glider and you work out that you can really stuff the brake and get it round and use good weight shift, is even in fairly, even in small, punchy, difficult climbs, I was still able to stay in them and work and get up in them. It's not like I wasn't able to do that. So actually, once you dialed into it and got used to it, then I found you could do that. I do find that, compared to some gliders, when you're working those small, difficult, punchy climbs and stuff, which we quite often have in the UK, when we're low down, the thermals are often quite small, and they're like little punchy things that you have to really turn up. It's only once you get higher that they get a bit wider generally. So we have quite a lot of that. And so when you're doing that, you have to work a bit harder. If you're flying with the Light and the Photon, you might want to have a more weight shifty harness to go with them if you like sort of more weight shifty, say like the Woody Valley GTO Light 1 or 2, which is quite weight shifty, or the Genie Light 3. You want something that's a bit more weight shifty. If you fly it with a harness that's quite sort of not so weight shifty and flat and steady and stuff like that, like the Submarine, then you'll find that again you need to work a bit harder to get it to get round. Again, you can do it and you can make get the glider around. But I think, yeah, it's a little bit, yeah, a bit harder work. I'll be honest, at first I was a bit like, oh my God, I want this to turn quicker. Really, is this a barge or what? But after getting used to the glider and learning about the breaking point and everything like that, I've worked out that I can crank it and bank it round. I've actually had some pilots comment that they've noticed that I've managed to really crank up and turn up with them on the Light. And so you can do it, it's just takes a bit more effort, that's all. The climb rate is very good, very efficient. Because for the handling side, generally you want to fly the glider more loaded, and it does still climb really well, even top loaded. But I'd say your kind of sweet spot is like a few kilos below the top of the rate range, maybe even 5 or so, somewhere around. It depends on the conditions you're flying in, your harness and your preferences. But for me, I kind of say generally to get the best balance of the best climb rate, if it's like not such strong thermals, but still keeping the handling, then you want to keep it pretty well loaded, but maybe not right at the top. If it's a good day, a good thermic day, you can be right at the top of the weight range, and the glider's going to turn better, and you're going to still climb really well. It's probably one thing that I'll say about the Light and the Photon, that personally, I'd like them to turn and be a bit more nimble and agile on the handling. But having said that, I can see that they're so solid and comfortable and perform and are so efficient that I can see that's a trade-off that I think some pilots will feel that is worth it. Some pilots who kind of prioritise nimble, agile, playful handling. I don't think the Photon and the Light kind of shine in that area. But if you're looking for very good performing all-rounder, that's a glider that does really well in light scratchy stuff, but is also very solid and well behaved in strong turbulent conditions, that's where I think the Photon and the Light are really stand out and offer a really good package. Very clearly a proper two-liner, and flying on the B-rises works very well. The pressure on the B-rises is firm, moderate to firm. It's not heavy and it's not light. As usual, when you go onto full bar, then the pressure gets lighter in the first part of it and firms up as you return back to the same sort of level with the rear risers. Good and usable and give good feedback. This is a glider to be flown a lot on the rear risers, definitely. And I think that maybe that's part of the thing with the handling, is that a lot of the time you're on the rear risers and you're on bar and when you're gliding. It's only when you really go to thermaling that you tend to go on the brakes, although you can use the rear risers a bit for that as well. So yeah, very, very good on the rear risers, and very good feeling, good communication, maybe a little bit on the firm side, but in terms of flying actively, even in pretty choppy air, and we've had some good spring conditions, you can carry on using the risers for a good long time before you feel like you need to come off them to fly actively on the brakes, is what I've found. Going on to bar, the Light and the Photon are definitely very quick in the class. They're definitely some of the fastest ENC two-liners. They've got very good speed, very good glide. The gliders are very, very solid at speed, very efficient. And then the combination of the rear risers being very effective. It's definitely a glider to be flown like a proper two-liner, and that's how you're going to get the most out of it. If you're not flying these gliders like that, then you're not really going to get the best out of them, and you might actually not get a huge benefit out of them, frankly, compared to a 3 or 2.5 liner. I know some have measured the top speed as being about 18 kilometers an hour over trim, and it really depends a lot on the air mass and your height above sea level and things like that. And I've spent such a lot of time measuring the difference in speed on glides, up and down, up and down, up and down, and all I see is the numbers going up and down, up and down, up and down as you're moving around in the air. And the only time you see a clear thing is when the air's completely smooth, but that doesn't tell you how the glider performs in turbulent air, which is what you really active air, which is what you really need to know. But I can say the Light is very quick. You can really feel it speed up. It stays really solid. It's really, when you look at the leading edge where some other gliders get a lot of dimpling and fluttering and things like that, and the glider starts to feel a bit edgy, it just feels really solid. very performant, and even a speed bar chicken like me is pretty happy, even when the air's a bit choppy, going on full bar and carrying on flying on the rear risers. And I have to say, I don't think I've had a single collapse, even with lots of testing. Of course they will collapse eventually. So really the glide performance is right at the top of the C-Class. It's one of the very best. It's very usable and the speed is very usable. So that translates into pilots who are looking at this kind of glider, is that if you're looking to fly and get the best performance out of the day for whatever reason, cross-country leagues, SRS competitions, whatever it is, whatever tickles your fancy, then it's definitely a contender, a strong contender. Let's start off with tip stalls. It does tip stalls perfectly fine, but they're quite small and the descent rate isn't very high. Easy in, not such high pressure for tip stalls, still, but partially that's because they're actually rather small, and some of the smallest I've seen on a wing, and the descent rate doesn't increase that much. So it does a little bit. So that's something, another little area, that's a little niggle I'll have on the Light. But the good news is that the Light does also do big ears with the outer A-lines. Having said that, you do need to push at least a third bar and maybe a half bar, I found, to do it. And then you do need to reach up really quite high. So people with the shorter arms thinking about it might struggle a bit. But you need to reach up really quite high. And then I found you need to give them a really pretty firm pull down, because otherwise what will happen is they just kind of go, they just kind of come down a bit and don't collapse. But once you manage to break them, then you can get the big ears in. It does do big ears, they're quite physical to pull in, you have to reach really high, but you get a better descent rate out of the big ears than you do with the tip stalls. And then to get them out, I found that if I let them go, they just stay there. Even doing the wobbly thing wobbling in the harness doesn't seem to clear it. So I needed to pump them out, and you can just give them a firm pump like that. Or if you just want to be a bit more careful not to stall the glider, you can give them a pump like this, so you're pulling in on the tip. That seemed to work well at clearing them. Yeah, going into the spiral, the glider is kind of at first a bit steady. It's like that turn, and again it wants you to kind of like tell it you want to go into a spiral, and then it builds in, and then the spiral's very controllable. It does build up as usual, lots of speed and G's, but it's very manageable and easy to come out of the spiral and manage that, I found. Wing overs. So actually interesting, I found the same with the Photon and the Light, despite that tendency for the handling and in turns to feel like the glider wants to keep straightening back out again, and you have to like, oh, go on. I think because the glider is so solid and builds up energy, they're actually, both the Light and the Photon are very nice for wing overs. I don't think the Light and the Photon are gliders somebody's gonna buy because they're like, I'm looking for the most playful glider. They want the most solid and efficient glider for flying big distances and cross countries, or maybe just to be top of the stack and do well like that. And then they want a glider that's solid and reassuring in turbulence, and that's what they're favouring. It's a wrap. I'm out of here. See ya.